Hello everybody. So I wanted to do a video that's a response video to a channel I've just discovered. It's a fantastic channel. I've watched a few of their videos now. I think they're brilliant, absolutely brilliant. The channel's called Hardy's Books, and you may have seen them already. They're doing really well. So Hardy's Books, a couple that recently went to Worldcon, and they did some videos about that, which was how I discovered them. But they've done some really interesting videos, and they've recently did a video which was in defense of reading for pleasure, in brackets, a rant. And I'm going to write that as the name of mine, as that's what they called theirs, and I'm going to do a response video because I think it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and I wanted to echo what they said, but also refer to specific books as well, in case you can relate to the books, because I think that's a fun way of doing it. But it's a really important point that I think sometimes gets lost on BookTube. People are so busy writing or recording reviews of books where they want to seem intelligent or informed or knowledgeable or experienced, that it's almost like that's more important than, but did you enjoy it, and it's like they seem afraid to say they enjoyed something that was purely entertaining and wasn't necessarily particularly deep. Although I've got two piles of books here, and my books are kind of split in half, and the second half of the books I'm going to refer to are definitely a lot deeper than the first pile, and they are very serious books. Some of them, well, actually not half of them, a few at the end are serious books that I did enjoy, and it gave me pleasure, even though they were very serious. So they're not all frivolous books, but I would like to say that there is a definite big point here that I want to make about enjoying the pleasure of reading frivolous books. So sometimes that kind of frivolity is kind of mocked or diminished, or well, it's okay, but it's a bit silly, or it's a bit light. It didn't engage my brain enough, and one of the reasons as well I wanted to do this straight away is because I wanted to do this during Garbaugust, because obviously Garbaugust is celebrating the enjoyment of switching your brain off and just enjoying a story, enjoying a yarn, enjoying somebody being a good storyteller, but not necessarily being a particularly wordy storyteller. I think that's a lot of the strength of Garbaugust. So I'll tell you a few things they said in their video. So they talked about enrichment and entertainment and the importance of that in your reading. It said they both said that they're not into the should in their videos, but they did say you should gravitate towards what gives you pleasure, but you shouldn't be using the word should to read stuff that you think you should read. And I think that's absolutely right. I've been saying that on my channel for years as well. I think that's really important. They said about DNFing if you're really not feeling it, and I think that's a good point as well. Unfortunately, I don't really DNF that often, and I did leave a book to come back to later recently that I thought I was going to really like, and I wasn't really engaging in it, but I was convinced it was because of where I was. So that was Andy Weir's Project Hail Mary. I absolutely love The Martian so much, and I actually quite like the second one as well. So I thought I thought I'd really like it. So I'm going to read it again because I'm sure that was me, but I was happy to put it down. It's like you got to enjoy your reading, and I wasn't enjoying it, or at least I wasn't engaging in it. It wasn't I wasn't enjoying it. It wasn't a drag, but I realised I wasn't really taking it in. They talked about some of the reasons why you might not enjoy your book that you're reading. Talked about reading slumps and how you can get into that slump too easily if you read the wrong books, or you don't relax about your attitude to your reading. And I thought that was really good. Where you read, they talked about that as well, and that was really good. So you can be a bit mindful about that. I've done that before in a video where I said about reading more. I recorded that about a year ago. But today I read on the train and on the bus today, and reading on a journey, I always find that really easy to do. I've got more distractions at home, and I definitely find it works with my brain better if I'm on a journey and I can just read. I read a whole book on the plane to New Orleans recently. Reading on a journey is really good for me. And I love reading in bed, but it often means I fall asleep. I fall asleep. So, you know, it's not necessarily the best option, but I enjoy it. I like the comfort of doing it. Clearly, it's too comfortable, but I do. That's my favourite place to read if I can, if I can stay awake. So they talked about that and the mindfulness nature of it. And maybe reading slower to enjoy the book more and don't worry about getting through it quickly. And I think that's a good point to make, especially when you're doing book events and you're trying to offer as many examples of something that you've read. Like, oh well, you could read this as well. You know, I've read this as well. And I definitely don't read as many books as a lot of booktubers that say, oh, I read 10 this month, you know, 20 this month. I am pleased if I get to 7 in a month. I feel like I've done well. And clearly not been too busy with other things, because I do lead a very busy life. So they talked about that as well, which is really good. And they used some really interesting phrases in the video. I just wrote a few down, like reading like a writer. I think that's a really interesting phrase. Read like a writer. I've never really heard that before, I don't think, and I think that was really good. And then towards the end of the video, they say great things like, there's too many tabs open in my brain. I think Laura says that. There's too many tabs open in my brain, and it ends up closing down or something like that. And I'm like that, you know. I've also always got lots of things I'm thinking about. So that's not always the best time to read, and you want to read when you've got more headspace. And they say pursue joy. Pursue joy. I think that's brilliant. Absolutely, pursue joy. Not the woman joy. I'm sure she'd prefer to be left alone. But pursue joy. That'd be brilliant. And then they even quote David Crosby at the end. Let your freak flag fly. How cool is that? That's one of my favourite phrases. It comes from David Crosby, and that is awesome. So yeah, let your freak flag fly and enjoy what you're reading. So that was what they were saying, and I thought I'd just go through very quickly go through a bunch of books that I definitely had pleasure reading. A lot of these are my favourite books, but some of them are just recent reads, not necessarily my favourites, and I'll just say a few words about them as I go through them. So this is what I'm reading at the moment. I'm really enjoying it. It's given me a lot of pleasure. You'll see in the Garbaugust next vlog when I talk about that in more detail. But this is giving me a lot of pleasure, and a lot of it is about how it's written. And I love the film, but this is better than the film, I think. The pacing's better, and the wit is clearer, and it's really, really enjoyable. So that's given me a lot of pleasure. And the novelisation of Dark Star by Andean Foster, clearly a very good writer. I thought I'd go straight on to my favourite author once I talked about that. So I'm just going to use 2 examples of Ray Bradbury. So this is my favourite Ray Bradbury book, and I think with this one, I get a lot of pleasure out of the writing always with Ray Bradbury. So the just the way he uses words is lovely, and also the plot and the characters, the reflections on growing old, and the memories and regrets of youth as well. All those kind of things are in that book. It's such a beautiful book. So yeah, I've read this like 3 times, and I'll be reading it again soon. For my Ray Bradbury deep dive. And this was interesting because Killer Come Back to Me, I've got 2 versions of this, but I thought I'd hold up the Hard Case Crime one because I'm so chuffed to have it. This version is the hardback one that you don't find so easily. But this is what the pleasure I get out of this was discovering how versatile Ray Bradbury is and how interesting his early career is in crime and mystery stories, not just the science fiction he's well known for. He's written all sorts of things, and I really enjoyed that. I thought, oh, this is an interesting start. Oh, this is where he's going with this. Oh, that's a different kind of story. So that was a really great, and there's a lot of really good stories in here as well. So I got pleasure out of that. I recently raved about this book, and it's not the best book in the world, but I did enjoy it. It gave me a lot of pleasure. And going back to the general point that both the Harley's Books channel made and what I'm trying to make is I shouldn't be embarrassed about that. I shouldn't be having a guilty pleasure because it's an airport book. You know, it's a bestseller from famous people, because I did enjoy it. I did enjoy this book, and it gave me pleasure, and that's what it's about. It was a fun story, and I did say that the thriller element could have been bigger, but it is a fun story with elements of it that I can relate to in my own life, because it's got lots of stuff about music in it. So yeah, awesome. This is pretty much universally loved. There's no surprise that this gave me pleasure. It's given me pleasure since I was like 12 or something. I can't remember what year it was I read it, but I was very young. and I've always loved it. And the pleasure I get out of this is the humour. I know it definitely sparked my imagination when I was young. This was one of the things that really got me into science fiction and made me love the idea of stories in space and with aliens, and that kind of unpredictability of it, improbability drive. So yeah, this gave me all sorts of different reasons why that gave me pleasure. This is an interesting one I wanted to mention because this is book 8 in the Chronicles of St. Mary's. I don't mention those books so often. I don't think they get mentioned at all, really. I hardly ever see them mentioned on BookTube. And I'm on book 8. And I do really like these. No, there it is. And I do really like these books. They're fun. They are possibly YA, but I'm not really sure. I don't really see it as YA. I think they're very well written. There's lots of research into history in these. This is about a school that they go back in time to get the correct events right in history and go back to the present to sort of write about it. So it's a time travel kind of comedy thing with some relationship stuff in there with the character Max, because she's often in the middle of the chaos. So yeah, and the rest of this history is number 8. So yeah, I mean, I get pleasure out of this series, and I need to get back to it. But again, is it a guilty pleasure? No, it's not a guilty pleasure. Little Fuzzy, this is a book that I've praised before, and doesn't get talked about that much, but it is seen as a classic, and I think it's a really nice, quite a cozy science fiction book, really, but it has got a lot of conflict in it because of what they're doing to the little fuzzies, and it's a sweet little book, and I really like it. So yeah, a bit of pleasure there from the story and from the general point as well about what we do to creatures that we don't seem to consider as important and that kind of thing. This was a series. This was the first book in a trilogy by Drew Williams that I discovered randomly. Again, I think I'm the only person that's mentioned this series on BookTube. I definitely recommend it. It's a lot of fun. It's a big kind of space opera thing, but with a light touch, not massively hard science. Great characters, a big canvas. So there's a big kind of war going on, but there's this sort of scientific problem at the heart of it that they've tried to correct. I won't go into it too much, but it's a good story, and again, I really enjoyed it. So yeah, I got pleasure out of that for that reason. I always get pleasure out of the Swords books from Fritz Lieber because I love the Fafnir and Grey Mouser characters. There they are, awesome characters. Thieves in Lankmar, basically in situations and settings that had a huge influence on Dungeons and Dragons and the fantasy world in general. But I like this, and I like the way it's written as well. I like the way that Fritz Lieber turns a phrase as well, so I get pleasure out of that as well. I'm going. I didn't really want this to be a hugely long video. This was a lot of fun. This had an extremely good pace. It had a really gripping story. 2 stories that were linked that came together with this fantastic climax at the end of it. Brilliant book from start to finish. But the pleasure came from all sorts of things. I love the characters as well. I love the world building and the suspense and the unpredictability of it. And then there was a lovely ending. So yeah, I know it's the first book in a huge series, but I think it stands alone as a great book. So I got a lot of pleasure with that. Right, so these will start getting darker. I've recently got into a conversation about this with Dave, my partner in Is This Thing On live stream. He hasn't read this yet. He needs to read this. But I get pleasure from all sorts of things about this. The way it's written, the plot, not so much the characters actually in this, but the way things happen in the book is brilliant. It's one of my favourite books. I love it. Day of the Triffids. You've got to read this if you haven't read it. It's so well written. So yeah, I love that. I get the pleasure out of the story really for that one. So Stephen King, is he the king of character? King of characterization? Oh, big statement. But these are 2 of his detective ones. Both I read recently due to the Holly Gibney project that we did, but they're 2 really good ones. This was the first one where she was introduced in a very minor part, and this was a recent book that came out just about Holly, and they're both really good. They give a lot of pleasure. There's the kind of the suspense and mystery around the crime plot in this, probably more than anything else, but he's always good at doing characters, and the Mr. Mercedes character is good. He's kind of a typical character, but he's done really well, and you really get a sense of who he is, like you do with all the other characters, the children in it as well. So yeah, with him a lot of time as a characterization. With this one, oh my god, the villains are disgusting. The suspense is really palpable. You are fretting about the state of play and where the characters are, and you're like, go home or get out of that situation. And Holly is fully developed by now when you really care about her. So yeah, amazing. I get a lot of pleasure out of the political deep dive, if you like, in this book. Ursula K. Le Guin is fantastic at writing anyway. The way she writes is beautiful. She's one of my favorite authors. But for this one in particular, I love the fact that she puts two very different ideologies into the mind of this man who's trying to reconcile the two worlds as an envoy, and it's really interesting. So Dispossessed is a brilliant book for that. This is one of my favorite books. I've got to mention it. I tell you what I'll say though, this is not just a lot of pleasure because of the plot and the characterization of Neville, but also I get a lot of pleasure out of the physicality of this book. I love the little corgi books. I just love them. It's the size of my hand. They're little cute little things that you can read with a lot of pleasure. The actual pleasure of the physical book. I've talked about this on my channel before. I'll say it again. There's pleasure in the actual object itself. This book is different to all the other I Am Legend corgi books because this is my copy. This I have a relationship with this copy. So yeah, I get pleasure out of that as well. So things that may be more surprising, I'm not going to say I get pleasure out of. So this one is a book that sometimes, well, I say most of the time, just gets praise for the right reasons, but sometimes gets criticized for it not having enough conflict in it. But what I love about this is definitely one of my favorite Becky Chambers books, is the world building, the alienness of the aliens, some of the ways that she explores that, and the characters interactions basically is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. So I get a lot of pleasure out of that, and there's a kind of like a Star Trek-iness about it. She's said before she's a huge Star Trek fan, and you can really see that in this book, I think. So I get pleasure out of that. This was an interesting one I wanted to mention because with this one, Joe Abercrombie's The Blade itself, I didn't get any pleasure out the first 50 pages. I was thinking, oh my god, this is annoying, and then it basically won me over by the end of the book. So this did give me pleasure, but not straight away. So I didn't choose to DNF this, and I actually initially read this as a buddy read with Ollie from CriminOlly, and he did DNF it, but I carried on, and halfway through it started picking up, and then it started getting good towards the second half, and it did. I thought it was a good book by the end of it, but it took a while to get going. It's got to be said. But I thought it was interesting that it gave me more pleasure than displeasure by the end of it, but it just took a while to give me that pleasure. 1984 is clearly a very intense / potentially depressing book, but it does give me pleasure because it works on your brain, and it's brilliantly realized. There's so much to it as far as exploring ideology, exploring what happened, how does a totalitarian system have a very firm concrete grip on a population, and the stuff in here is sadly even more relevant now, it seems, than before, but there's so many things in here that he explores in ways that totalitarian regimes work, that's what you get pleasure out of, the brilliance of that. This is a book where the pleasure comes out of this intense situation that gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and boils to a ridiculous frenetic storm by the end of it, and it's very clever, but it's very thought-provoking. So again, you get pleasure out of the thought-provoking element, and it makes you think about humanity and what would happen if we were in that situation where a high-rise building becomes a jungle of savagery. And then two more. Celeste Ng's book, Little Fires Everywhere. This is a really, really serious book about a dysfunctional family basically reacting to a suicide. So it's got very serious context, very serious storylines running through it, kind of interweaving. But I got a lot of pleasure out of the way it investigates what relationships are like, what family is like, and how someone can be so set apart from everybody else. And I found it quite a beautiful read, but it's very downbeat, so kind of be aware of that. But I got pleasure out of that. So different kinds of pleasure. And one last one. Is this the last one? I think I'll make it the last one. Yeah, the 10 Loves of Miss Nishino. What I found with this was it's just fascinating. The way that Kawakami writes is so unusual, and you don't know what you're going to get from her. There's an element of surprise always with her, and this was literally a man recounting his life and different relationships he's had, different styles of love, different versions of love, and all the way through him saying he can't love properly, and these different women that he'd have relationships with. And it's just fascinating, absolutely fascinating, but really different. So I was kind of getting a lot of pleasure out of the different element to it, as well as the unexpected element, as well as the great writing. So that sort of thing. Hope you found it interesting. Check out Hardy's Books channel, it's fantastic. And let me know below what you think of those books, but what books you get pleasure out of. And read for pleasure. Let your freak flag fly. Pursue joy, but not the person's joy. Leave her alone. Just leave her alone.
Paint me a picture of what it's like to be